should say up front, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm telling you what happened to me. Maybe there's a simple explanation for all of this. If there is, I never found it. And I'm not proud of how I reacted. I didn't act like a hero. I didn't even act like a decent coworker. I did what I did. And you can judge me after you hear the whole thing. So the company was called Bridalmere. Mid-size, software for billing and subscriptions. You know the type. A lot of dashboards in terms like customer lifetime value and churn. Our office was in one of those buildings that look new from the outside. Glass, bland logo. But inside the floors still smell like carpet glue and older dust. Like there used to be a different company there before ours. And before them, someone else. And the bones of the building never learned our names. I joined after the big pandemic waves. We were hybrid, which meant most days people worked from home and came in if their boss did. My team was small. Me, a front-end dev named Kim, an older guy named Raj who did DevOps but also checked the kitchen like it was his job, and our manager Jenna, who wore the same black blazer every day like armor. There were other teams on the floor, but we rarely talked. If you walked around at any given time, you could see a few heads over monitors, some empty plants slowly dying, jars of almonds, sticky notes with stale jokes. Corporate life. My desk was in a corner near a window that faced another glass building, so all I saw was people I didn't know doing the same work in a mirrored way. I pinned a photo of my dog to the felt wall because everyone does that. Whoever had the desk before me left a drawer full of pens and one of those stress balls shaped like a brain that already had fingerprints pressed into it. I squeezed it once, and it left a powdery residue on my palm. I threw it out. First week was normal. Too many logins, too many new names. Those intro meetings where you smile until your jaw cramps. I had a buddy assigned to help me ramp up. His name was Mateo. Friendly, fast typer. Had this habit of leaning over your screen to point at something instead of using the cursor like a normal person. He sat 2 banks over from me and wore headphones with no music, like a headband. But if you asked him a question, he always heard you. He told me some of the building gossip. You know, this division's going to be spun off. That exec got let go. The cleaners are a different contractor now. Don't leave your lunch labeled because it makes it more likely to get taken. I thought he was joking, but a labeled sandwich vanished on my second day. No note, nothing. I assumed someone was hungry. I started eating at my desk. The building had these small signs you stop seeing after 2 days. Quiet hours enforced. No food in conference rooms. Report spills. The one that stands out now said, "Stairwell A is one way, down only." It had a little arrow and that was it. No explanation. Part of the new fire code, maybe. I use the elevator like everyone else. There's a detail I keep circling back to in my head, and it's small, but I think it's where the edge of the whole thing started. It was the motion sensor lights in the bathroom. They were a little too eager. You'd step in and the lights came up before you'd moved, like they already knew you were coming. I told Raj and he shrugged. New sensors. The old ones missed people. Count your blessings. So I tried to forget it. The first strange thing that happened directly to me was an email. It hit my inbox late on a Thursday, right when I was packing up. The subject line was just my name, from an internal address. No body, no signature, no attachments. It landed, blinked bold for a second, and then gray. I clicked it. Nothing. Blank. I checked the headers because I'm not an idiot. It looked like our help desk system, but with a ticket number that was all zeros. I flagged it and walked over to Mateo's desk to ask if that ever happened. His chair was empty. His bag was on the floor. His screen was on, and I could see our Slack. He had a message from me open, a real one from earlier, where I had asked him for a password reset link. He had typed something and then stopped halfway. Use the single sign-on, and it ended, like he had lifted his hands mid-sentence and wandered off. His coffee cup was still steaming. I grabbed it, and I don't know why. I smelled it. Just coffee. I told Jenna I was heading out. She nodded without looking up. On my way to the elevator, I saw the cleaning cart pulled up near the hallway. A woman I didn't recognize was pulling liners out of trash cans with a practice motion, like her hands were separate from her. She didn't look at me, but I noticed she was wearing blue earplugs, the kind we kept by the servers. The hallway was quiet, but not that quiet. In the elevator, I checked my phone. The email had disappeared. Not deleted, just gone. It wasn't in any folder. I told myself it was the help desk system glitching, and I left it at that. Friday was a mess. There was a deploy planned, and one of the microservices was failing health checks on staging. Raj kept saying, "It's DNS," and then, "Okay, not DNS," and then we should roll it back. And then, "Don't tell Jenna yet." It was one of those days you eat whatever's in the communal cabinet. So lunch was a handful of walnuts and a stale granola bar and jelly beans someone left in a jar shaped like a bear. I kept thinking that I should go ask Mateo about that email. He didn't show up at all. In the afternoon, I pinged him. No answer. His status was gray. I messaged Kim, who was funny in a dry way. She wrote back. He said he was working from home today. I typed, "His bag was here yesterday." She replied with a shrug emoji, which is the corporate version of a blank stare. At the end of the day, Jenna called a quick stand-up to say good job on getting the service back, and to remind us that there was a security audit next week, and to keep our desks clean. That's the kind of thing that makes you roll your eyes. But people do come around with clipboards to check if you've left passwords on sticky notes. I looked at my desk and saw I had a stack of papers from onboarding that I hadn't filed. I decided to come in Sunday to sort it out. A quiet office is the best office. You know how it is on a Sunday in an office. The air feels different, like it belongs to the building more than to you. The lights are weird too. Fewer on, some flickering, a whole bay off like a dead tooth in the ceiling. The badge reader clicked louder than usual. My footsteps sounded loud. My footsteps sounded like someone else's footsteps. Okay, I know that sounds dramatic. I'm trying not to make this sound like a horror story, because that makes people switch off. I'm saying how it felt. I got to my desk and turned on my monitor. The wallpaper had changed. Instead of the default blue gradient, I had a photo of the office taken from somewhere near the ceiling. You could see the rows of desks. Mine, Kim's, Raj's. The angle was too high for a person. It looked like the view you get from a dome camera. I tried to change it back and the settings were grayed out. I checked under the desk and saw the HDMI cable had been unplugged and replugged into a splitter I didn't recognize. I traced it with my fingers to a box zip-tied under the desk. No label. I don't go around yanking cables in the office, so I left it. I went to print a form I needed to sign. The printer woke up from wherever printers go. It spat out 6 pages before mine, one after the other. It wasn't the backlog. Each page had the same header, Bridalmere letterhead, the one with the stripe along the left. But every page was a statement of separation. That's the company term for firing. I picked up the stack and my name was on the first one. My start date was correct. The end date was blank. Reason for separation: employee choice. The signature line had no line, just a white space with the faint outline of fingers, like someone had pressed the paper down hard with both hands while it was damp. I put the pile back in the tray and it was warm. I don't know why that sticks with me. Warm paper feels like a decision someone already made. As I stood there, the printer made that small click they make when the drum resets. It hummed like it was getting ready. I backed away and bumped into someone. I turned and a guy I'd never seen was there, wearing a black sweater with a little embroidered bee near the cuff. Company swag you get after a year. He smiled like we knew each other. "Weekend warrior," he said. His voice didn't match his face. It was too deep, or it reached the end of words before the words did. "Yeah," I said, "just catching up." He nodded at the pages in the tray. "You weren't supposed to print those. They were in the queue." He did a small shrug like he didn't mind. "You'll bring them to Jenna?" "Sure." He turned and walked toward stairwell A. The sign on the door said "Down Only," like always. He pushed it open, one hand, casual. I could feel the draft of stairwell air, that cold breath. He didn't look back. The door eased shut but didn't close all the way. It was one of those doors that catches at the end. I heard his footsteps fade, then come back up one flight, then stop. I waited, because it felt wrong to leave. Nothing else happened. I pushed the door the rest of the way until it latched. When I got back to my desk, my monitor showed an empty office again, but the angle had changed. Now I was seeing down the row toward the kitchen. I watched a cup on the counter slide an inch. Just that. I could have gotten up and walked down and checked. What? Gravity? But I didn't. It wasn't that I was scared. It was more that the office felt like it had switched to a different set of rules, and I didn't know them. I sat down and stared at the movement detection overlay in the top right of the screen. Tiny green box flaring for a frame, then gone. I clicked around to find the source of the feed, but nothing obvious. The little black box under my desk blinked a red LED, then off, then on, irregular, like a heartbeat without rhythm. You're going to say, "Call IT." And okay, yes, that would have been smart. But it was Sunday. The only people in the building were me, and maybe the cleaners, and whoever that man in the sweater was. Also, and this is the part I won't justify, I wanted to see what would happen next. I had that curious itch you get when something feels off, and you want to lean into it instead of away. We say we're rational. We're not. We want a story. I stood up and went to Kim's desk because she had a Swiss Army knife on a keychain she always left in a mug. It was there. I used the little flathead to pry the zip tie off the box under my desk. The box was heavier than I expected, not an HDMI splitter. A small camera unit, matte black, with a thin coaxial cable snaking into the wall where our outlets were. I unplugged the HDMI that went into my monitor. The screen went to black. I held the box in my hand and I could feel that faint hum gadgets get when they're live. I put it on my desk and turned it over. No brand, just a tiny printed sticker with a serial number and the word historical in a sans font so thin it looked like pencil. That's a real word, I know. But it didn't make sense there. I carried the box down the hall to the head of facilities office. His name was Everett. He wasn't in on Sundays, obviously, but he kept a locked cabinet with building on the label. I set the box on his chair like a joke I wasn't brave enough to finish and left a post-it. Found this under my desk. M. I figured that would prompt a boring email on Monday, and that would be that. Then I remembered the printer pages. I had left them in the tray. I went back. They were gone. There wasn't anyone on the floor. I went to stairwell A, opened it, and leaned over the rail. It felt like the shaft leaned back at me, like a throat. You know how stairs look down a middle column, and the light falls in a repeating pattern with the little landings? The light was off, except the exit signs. I heard something down there, a dragging paper sound. I stepped onto the first concrete landing, and my shoe squeaked. It sounded loud enough to wake a baby. I held the rail and peered down. I didn't see anyone. I don't know what I thought I would do if I did. Hey, those pages are mine? I let the door ease shut and stood there with my stupid half-formed plan. On the way back, I passed the kitchen. The cup I'd seen move on the camera was on the floor now. Nothing spilled because it was empty. I picked it up and put it in the sink like a person in a haunted house who thinks they can make the house feel better. Monday was normal. See? That's how it goes. Weird thing. Then normal day. The building was bright and everyone was back. Jenna had a smile for everyone like we had completed a project even though we hadn't. I looked for Everett to ask about the box. He wasn't in. I asked Raj casually if we had cameras on the floor other than the ones near the doors. He said, "Sure, that's a landlord thing." I said, "In the ceiling?" He said, "Where else?" I said, "Under desks." He blinked like he hadn't processed that sentence. Under what? I decided not to be the guy who makes a fuss about security on his second week. I shrugged. Never mind. Mateo wasn't in again. His Slack said "OOO." I assumed vacation. I sent him a message. "You alive? Need to pick your brain about onboarding junk." It sat there unread. Later, Kim said in the kitchen, "Apparently he's leaving." I said, "Where'd you hear that?" She said, "Jenna said at stand-up." I replayed the stand-up in my head, Jenna's usual sentences about roadmaps and resource betting. And no, that had not been said out loud. I looked at Kim's face for a clue. She had a little smile like she enjoyed being ahead of the gossip curve, but she didn't press it. After lunch, I got a calendar invite. Exit interview, Mateo. I shouldn't have gotten that. HR invites don't go to randoms. It was in one of those half-heard conference rooms that have soft chairs and a plant that's always damp. The invite had Jenna as organizer. I clicked quick because it felt like that moment in a movie where someone picks up a phone they shouldn't pick up. I wasn't going to attend, obviously. I wanted to see who else was on it. It had only 2 attendees, Jenna and me. Then it refreshed, and my name vanished. It was Jenna and TBA. I was doing actual work too, by the way. Browsers, bugs, tickets. I mention that because it's important you understand this isn't a ghost story where nothing else exists. The code didn't break because of any of this. The world kept doing its thing. Around 3, a woman I didn't know came over to my desk. She wore a badge on a lanyard with a different color than ours, a little lighter blue. She had a folder in her hands with a plastic tab. "Marcus?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "Not my name in real life, but that's what I used there. Doesn't matter." "I'm Becca," she said. "Building management." I leaned back. "Everett's out?" She nodded like we both knew that, and it was fine. "He asked me to pick up the unit. You left him a note." "Oh," I said. "Right." I thought, that was fast. "Did he say what it is?" "Just a unit," she said. "We're moving the historical nodes." She said it the same way it was printed, like it was a term she used every day. Her eyes flicked to my screen for a second, and then away. She wasn't nosy. It was more like someone who's trained to count screens without looking. I said, "Do we need to do anything?" She smiled like a nurse. "Nope, just thanks for flagging it." She tilted her head toward our glass doors that led to the elevator lobby. "We have a couple more rooms on this floor to adjust. If you hear a noise, don't worry." She left. I watched her badge the elevator bank with a physical key to open the panel, and the lights changed to a maintenance mode I hadn't seen before. About 20 minutes after Becca left, the air handling changed. I could feel the pressure shift on my ears like when a subway pulls in. The office got a little colder. It was subtle, but everyone noticed at the same time because we all did the thing where you rub your forearms as if that helps. Raj said, "HVAC." And Kim said, "Yep," like they were naming a baby and they were right. The motion sensor in the corner blinked. My monitor flashed like it had lost input for a fraction of a second, then came back. I trembled. I told myself it was the cold. Jenna did another stand-up at the end of the day. She said, "Remember, we've got a vendor walkthrough tonight. They'll be in after we leave. Please secure laptops." She said secure like it was a magic word. She also mentioned a desk reset. That phrase was new. People groaned. "It's not a big deal," she added. "They're just updating the plates." She meant those little name plates that slide into the metal holders at the edge. I had put mine in on my first day. It had my last name spelled wrong for the first 3 hours, until I found a second plate in the drawer with the right spelling. I assumed someone had made 2. I left on time. On the train home, I looked up historical node, because it was lodged in my brain like a seed husk. You can look it up if you want. There are a million different things that could mean. In our building, it meant one thing: a camera, or maybe a microphone, or maybe something I still don't have a name for. The next morning, my chair was wrong. It looked the same as always: mesh back, adjustable arms. But it was one click higher than I set it, and the lumbar wasn't right. I sat and sank an inch, and my knees hit the underside of the desk. I adjusted it. You know how the lever on those chairs has a bite mark shape? Mine had a smooth spot that wasn't there before. That means fingers, over time. Fine. Maybe the cleaners used it. Except the cleaners are under a contract that says they don't sit on chairs. Don't ask me how I know. Raj. Also, my nameplate was missing. The little metal holder was empty. The slot just had the ridges where the card slides in. I looked on the floor. Nothing. I checked the drawer. The old misspelled one and the corrected one were both gone. Kim walked in, saw me looking, and said, "Desk reset did it." She had a new plate on hers that had a new font. Thinner, more precise. See? They want them to match. She tapped it with her nail. It made a hollow sound like thinner plastic. Becca came around again with a rolling cart and stacks of plates in labeled baggies. She stopped at my desk and smiled in that nurse way again. "Ah," she said without looking at the name. "This one is a special." She put a plate into the holder. It looked like mine, but I could tell the edges were scuffed like it had been slid in and out 1,000 times. The black letters had a faint shadow, as if there had been another name there before, erased, and the ghost of it still showed through. It wasn't my name. It was the same number of letters, but if I let my eyes blur, I could see dips where curves should be, straight lines where there were none. I touched it with one finger. It felt warmer than the air. Becca noticed and said lightly, "We had to pull from archive. Supply chain. That was one of those phrases people use so you stop asking. It worked." I started seeing him again that afternoon. The man in the black sweater. I saw him reflected in the glass when I got water. I turned and the hall was empty. I walked to the place where he would have been and looked at the floor. That carpet shows deep footsteps when someone stands still too long. There weren't any. When I got back to my desk, my monitor flickered. The angle on the camera feed I'd seen on Sunday flashed for one frame. Then my normal wallpaper returned. I asked Kim if she saw it. She hadn't. She said, "Maybe it's your HDMI." And I nodded like that was fine. I tried to forget all of it. I'm not superstitious and I don't have the energy to be. Work was busy. We had another release. I went home. I slept. I woke up. I did it again. Normal life is a machine set to grind down anything weird until it fits. But then we had the audit. The audit people come every 6 months or so. They wear suits that have little pinstripes you can only see when they turn. They smile just the right amount. They ask where your monitor privacy screen is, and if you have visitors, and if the visitors sign in. They flip badges in their hands like coins. We had the meeting in the windowless room with the 2 whiteboards that never erase cleanly. Jenna lined us up like kids before a field trip. I could tell she was nervous in a way the auditors couldn't see. Her hand was shaking when she handed them the visitor log. About 30 minutes in, one of the auditors, tall, pale, a little mole on his cheek that looked drawn on, said, "And we'll need to see the historical footage for this floor for the past 2 weeks." Jenna didn't blink. "Everett has those," she said. "We'll get you access." The auditor looked straight at me. Or I thought he did. Maybe he was looking at the wall behind me. He said, "We already have access. We'd like to do it in the space." I didn't know what that meant. Kim looked at her keyboard like it had answers. Raj said, "Sure." Because Raj says that when he wants something to be true. We all filed out to the open office. The auditor pulled a small device from his jacket that looked like a phone but thicker. He walked to our glass door and held it up to the ceiling near the sprinkler head. It chirped softly, which felt wrong. The ceiling tiles looked the same as always, but somehow the air above us felt occupied. He moved to the corner where stairwell A met the hall and did it again. Chirp. He walked down the row. Chirp. Chirp. Stopping where I know now the cameras were, even though I couldn't see them. He stopped at my desk and held the device near my nameplate. It chirped 3 times. He smiled without showing teeth. "Here we go," he said. He tapped the device, and my monitor switched to the overhead view. It was the exact angle from Sunday. He scrubbed backward, and the screen showed my chair empty, then full of me, then empty again, reversed. He scrubbed forward, and there I was again, in loop. The way the video moved made me feel seasick, like my organs had turned around. The auditor put the device on the desk like a small pet. He said, "We're going to need to keep this docked here for the afternoon." Jenna nodded too quickly. "Of course." The auditor walked off without another word. My monitor went back to normal. As I reached to move my mouse, a small hair-thin line of static ran across the screen. Then another. Then a frame like a still photo burned in. It was my desk, overhead, but not now and not Sunday. The calendar on the wall was 2 months back. The potted plant on my desk was alive. There were sticky notes with numbers I didn't recognize. It was the imprint of a time I didn't live in, layered faintly over the present like an afterimage when you look at the sun. I blinked and it cleared. I moved my chair back, put my laptop to sleep, and walked to the restroom so I could breathe where no one could see. The automatic lights came on early, as always, as if they were welcoming something that hadn't arrived yet. I stood there with my hands on the cool porcelain sink and watched the little red LED on the motion sensor pulsing. I spoke out loud to my face in the mirror because it felt like the only way to stay inside my body. I said, "You're tired. It's nothing." And then the door opened and Mateo walked in. He looked the same, but not. Everything about him matched. Hoodie, headphones on his neck, uneven beard. But it felt like he was the memory of himself, like a photo printed on rough paper. He washed his hands even though he hadn't used the bathroom. He met my eyes in the mirror and smiled in a way that said we were in on something together. He said, "Hey." "Hey," I said. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded, then reached up to the automatic paper towel dispenser and held his hand near the sensor. It spit a paper towel out. He didn't take it. He held his hand there, and another paper towel came, and another, and after 6 or 7, he took none of them. He watched them hang like white tongues. He said, "It's better if you don't push." "What?" He looked at me like I had asked for water at a brewery. "The stairwells. Don't push." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He wiped his hands on his hoodie and left. He didn't dry them. I watched the door swing, close, and the little red LED on the motion sensor blinked twice like it was agreeing with him. When I got back to my desk, Jenna was standing there with the auditor's device in her hand. She looked annoyed, which was normal. She said, "Did you talk to Mateo?" "Yeah," I said automatically. Then my brain caught up to my mouth. I saw him. She smiled in a way that showed all her teeth in a polite rectangle. "Well, he's not here. He left." She placed the device on my desk like a trophy we won. "You're fine," she said. "We're all fine." She walked away before I could answer. I know this is long. I'm trying to be thorough so you can tell me if any of this sets off a normal people explanation. You asked for human language, and that's what I'm using. I don't have any other. The thing with the stairwell kept circling in my head. Don't push. I decided to test it. Not because I'm brave, but because I was tired of the loop. At the end of the day, when the office had thinned out and only Kim and the cleaners and I were left, I got up, took my backpack, waved at Kim, and went to stairwell A. I opened it. The air was cooler, like always, and it smelled like concrete and lemon cleaner. I stepped onto the top landing and let the door ease shut behind me. It didn't latch. It stuck on the last half-inch. I stood still. Above me, somewhere up near the roof, there was a click, the kind you hear when a pipe cools. I didn't push the door. I waited. The silence was not silent. The exit signs hummed. Far below, a door closed. That meant someone was on a different floor in the same stairwell. They didn't start up the stairs. They stood. I could feel them the way you feel someone watching you in a mirror. I counted to 30. Then I pressed the door. It resisted at first, the way those doors do when there's a pressure difference. I pushed harder, and it gave, and a piece of air the size of a hallway flowed past me. I stepped out into our office, except it wasn't our office. Or it was, but at a tilt. My chair was at the wrong desk. The light fixtures made a grid that didn't line up with the desks. The kitchen was closed off with plastic like a renovation. The wall where the kitchen plant was had been moved 2 feet closer to the windows, which shouldn't be possible. The logo on the wall said Bridalmere in an older font. The motion sensor light on the ceiling blinked steady, like it was relieved to see me. I heard the copy of my footsteps that had been following me for 2 weeks finally catch up. I didn't step in. I kept one foot hooked behind me on the stair landing. That felt important. I scanned for people. The office was empty, but it was also not empty. You know how you can feel heat from a stove even if it's off? The air was like that, residual. I saw my nameplate on a desk 2 rows over. It was the scuffed one. It had a different first initial. I saw a coat on the back of a chair that I recognized from photos of off-sites I wasn't at. I saw, on the corner of my not my desk, a stack of printouts. The top page said, Statement of Separation, and below that, a name that looked like my name if you squinted. I could not read past the first letter. It slid in and out of focus like a word in a dream. On the second page, there was a signature line. It was dented as if someone had pressed a pen there so hard it broke. I was breathing shallow. You know the feeling when you've had too much coffee and not enough food? That. I looked to the glass door to the elevator lobby. It wasn't glass in this version. It was the kind of safety glass with wire inside. Old school. The sign on it didn't say Bridalmere. It said Quiet Floor, which I'd never seen before except on that small sign by the stairwell. The letters on the sign weren't printed. They were pressed from behind, so the front was smooth. I pulled the door open with my heel on the landing. It wanted to close. I let it. I was back in my office, the one I know. Kim's sweater over her chair, Raj's stress ball in his hand, Jenna's blazer. I exhaled. I walked to the elevator like I was at the end of a long meeting. I went home. I went to sleep. I dreamed about nameplates. I didn't go back for 2 days. That never happens with me. I didn't call in sick. I just worked from my couch and sent a message to Jenna that I had a cough. She reacted with a thumbs up and a feel better, with extra exclamation marks. On day 2, she pinged me. Are you coming in tomorrow? I wrote yes before I meant it. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that other office, and the way the motion sensor blinked like a pulse. When I got in the next morning, my badge worked, which surprised me a little. The elevator smelled like someone had microwaved fish. The building sometimes does that to you. I walked across the lobby. A new guard sat at the desk I'd never seen before. He had a crossword book open but wasn't writing in it. He watched me in that way where his eyes didn't move. I smiled. He didn't. I pressed the elevator button. The light didn't come on for a second, then did. The doors opened half a speed too slow. Someone had jammed a Post-it in the crack. I pulled it out, and it came away clean, but left a residue of fibers like the door had been hungry. The floor was louder than usual, not with talking, with air. The HVAC was cycling, on off, in a way that made my teeth buzz. Becca was in the hall with her cart. She gave me a small wave with her fingers low, like you signal a friend in a church. She had a stack of privacy screens in a box labeled historical. She didn't stop. I didn't ask. At my desk there was a box, brown with my last name on it in marker. The handwriting was neat, built from little squares. I opened it. It was half full of those packing peanuts that look like stale Cheetos. Under the peanuts I found my old plate, the misspelled one, a mouse pad I'd never used, an onboarding booklet, a key with no label, and a folded shirt with the Bridalmere logo from 2 rebrands ago. The shirt smelled like a closet. Under that, at the bottom, there was an envelope. No name. I opened it. Inside was a printed photo, matte, like those instant prints you get from kiosks. It showed the stairwell landing. Not ours, but very like ours. The angle was from the top, looking down. On the landing was a stack of papers, white, held down by a coffee cup. You couldn't read the text. In the corner of the photo, whoever had printed it had scribbled in pencil, "Don't push." The pencil marks had bruised the paper. I held the photo up so it caught the overhead light at the same angle the auditor's device had been at. A pattern flickered across the surface, like a watermark. If you tilted and squinted, you could see faint dotted lines that made boxes, like a form. In one of the boxes, there was a check mark that had smeared. I could feel the graphite on my finger after I touched it. "Cool shirt," Kim said behind me. I didn't hear her walk up. I turned so fast I bumped my knee on the drawer and swore. "Whoa," she said. "It's okay." Her eyes flicked to the box. Something in her face changed, like she recognized the pattern. The plate, the shirt, the key. She didn't pretend not to see. "You running?" she asked, but the question was soft, like when someone asks if you need water after you've fallen. "I don't know," I said. She nodded, like she understood the category of "I don't know" we were in. "If you do, don't use the stairwell," she said quietly. "The elevator is slow, but it's honest." She pointed at the key. "That opens the storage cage downstairs," she said. If you need to put something somewhere." She stopped. That sounded insane. "Sorry." "No," I said. "It helps." It did, in a way that made no sense. It felt like she had handed me a map of a place I hadn't admitted existed. I put the key in my pocket and folded the shirt back into the box because that seemed respectful. Around 11, the power flickered. Only for a second. Everyone made the same noise you make when a video call freezes and you hope it wasn't your fault. When the lights came back, one of the overheads in the aisle near stairwell A didn't turn on. It stayed dark in a small square. The shadow of the grid fell over an empty chair. It looked like something that should be filled. The day went half normal. Meetings, tickets, lunch at your desk. In the afternoon, it started to rain. The windows went a little blurry. Raindrops tracked down the glass in lines that made the building across look like it was melting. I know I'm drifting. I'm trying to get to the part that matters without getting ahead of myself. At 4:30, I got a direct message from an account with no name. Not unknown, just blank, no avatar. It said, "I left mine in the cage. Take it if you want." There was a link to a network path that didn't look like ours. I clicked it. It opened a folder. Inside were 2 files. One was a video with a date as a title that would make you shrug any other day. The other was a document. Statement_of separation.pdf. I hovered the mouse. The preview showed a tiny rectangle of text. The lines in it seemed to line up with the watermarked pattern in the photo. My heart hurt in my chest, like I had lifted something heavy wrong. I clicked the video. It was a recording of the overhead feed, time-lapse. Our office, but sped up. People came and went like weather vanes. The light changed, then changed back. At one point in the clip, which I guess was compressed from weeks, a figure walked in wearing a black sweater with a small embroidered bee near the cuff. He sat at my desk. He didn't move for a long time. The motion sensor blinked in a regular pattern above him. Then he stood and went to the printer. He stood there, hands on the tray, for a long time. On the video, his head tilted in a way that made me think of a dog listening to a whistle. Then the stairwell door opened, and someone we couldn't see stepped just out of frame. He turned toward it. He nodded. He left. He didn't come back. I stopped the video. I stood up. I took the key out of my pocket. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not because I was being secretive, but because I didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't make me sound like I needed a nap and a therapist. The storage cage was in the basement. You take the elevator down, and then you have to badge through a gate that smells like wet metal. The floor is painted concrete with stripe lines in colors that mean nothing to anyone except the person who painted them. The cages are chain link with padlocks. Each one has a clipboard on a hook with a paper that says what's inside. Chairs, seasonal decor, crates. Most of the papers haven't been updated in years. Our cage had a label that said Bridalmere F, F, and E in Jenna's handwriting. The lock was the kind where the shackle is too thick to cut with normal bolt cutters. The key from the box fit. I turned it. On the other side of the cage, something that wasn't wind lifted the corner of a drop cloth and let it fall. Inside, it smelled like cardboard and dust and that breath the building has. There were the chairs from when we got new ones, stacked like vertebrae. Boxes of plates with old logos. A stand-up banner from a career fair. And in the back, on a low shelf, there were 3 banker's boxes with no labels. The tape on them had been cut and taped again, a dozen times. I opened the first one. It was full of nameplates, heavy, metal, older design. Each had a strip of old foam tape on the back like a scar. I ran my fingers along them. Some were warped like they'd been pried off a wall. I recognized none of the names, but they all had the same font we had 2 rebrands ago. The second box had keycards. Hundreds. Some clipped to lanyards, some not. Each had a little circle where a thumb goes when you hold it up to the reader. That felt intimate in a way that made me put the lid back on. The third box had documents. Paper, bound with black binder clips. The top one was a stack of statements of separation. I picked it up and held it close. The paper smelled faintly of something that wasn't the office. Not smoke. Not mold. Something like cold hair. I flipped through them. Different names. Not mine. Not anyone I knew. Some had signatures, and the signatures looked wrong in the same way the motion sensor lights felt wrong. Not immoral, not illegal, just misaligned. At the bottom of the stack, under a sheet of blank printer paper acting like a polite layer, there was a manila folder. The tab had no label. Inside there were photos, printed like the one on my desk. Each showed a stairwell landing, always the same angle, always a stack of papers held by an object. Sometimes a coffee cup, sometimes a stapler. Once, a shoe. In the corner of each, written in pencil, was a different word. Don't push. Wait. Not for you. Ascend. Down only. Quiet. 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 I felt dizzy. I sat on a crate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The message was from the blank account again. It said, "If you take it, it's yours." That's the rule. Then, a second later, another line. But we all need someone to take it. The word "we" did something to my stomach. I put the phone away. I took the envelope with photos. I took the folder with the forms. I took my nameplate, the scuffed one, from the box upstairs and slid it into my pocket next to the key. That part matters, I think. The plate felt like a weight. Not heavy, just present. When I came back upstairs, the office had that end-of-day hush. People gathered their things, closed laptops, made little jokes to bleed the day out of themselves. The light over the aisle near the stairwell was still out. In the darkness, the empty chair looked more empty than before. I walked past Jenna. She looked past me. Maybe she didn't see me. Or maybe she saw something else where I was. At my desk, there was another box, smaller. It had my name in the new, thinner font. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. Exit clearance, it said. Please return the following: laptop, badge, monitor, peripherals. The list had boxes next to each. None were checked. There was no pen. I wasn't fired. No one said I was. But there it was, like a ghost of a future or a past that wanted to be now. Kim walked by and didn't stop, but as she passed, she said under her breath, "Take the elevator." I nodded. I packed slowly, performing each motion so deliberately I felt like a puppet practicing being alive. I put my laptop in a sleeve. I coiled the power cable. I slid the photo from the envelope into the outer pocket of my backpack. I left my monitor on the desk. I did not return my badge. I took my nameplate out of my pocket and held it in my hand. I didn't go to the elevator. I went to the stairwell. I know. I heard myself too. There's a stubborn streak in me that makes me touch the pan after someone says, "Careful, it's hot. Don't push." Okay. But what happens if I push gently? I opened the stairwell door. The air came like a drink. I stepped in. I let the door rest against my back. I held my nameplate in my hand like a ticket. At the bottom of the stairwell, on the landing 2 floors down, there was a stack of papers held down by a coffee cup. I recognize everything by now. I could see the pattern, the way the building speaks. The cup was white, with a crack near the handle. The papers had that watermark you only see if you tilt them just so. The pencil mark in the corner said, "Wait." I didn't want to go down. I didn't want to go up. I wanted a refund on the last 2 weeks. I wanted the old chair where the lever had the right bite mark. I wanted to be a person who laughed at office horror stories because they are always the same. Too much work, secret cameras, someone disappears into a promotion or a layoff, and that's just business, baby. I wanted to be that boring again. I stood on the top landing and held my nameplate over the shaft. It looked ridiculous, like a tiny boat over an ocean. I loosened my grip until I was holding it with 2 fingers. It would have taken nothing to let go. I could feel the building waiting. Not alive. Don't get me wrong. Buildings aren't people. It was more like a machine waiting to accept input. Behind me, in the office, a chair rolled a few inches. The sound came through the door like a hint. The stairwell door touched my back, then pushed without pushing. The motion sensor light above my head blinked, and for a moment it lit the stairwell brighter than I had ever seen it. For a second, I could see dust motes in a tight beam, and in that beam were shapes like fingerprints moving through air. Not a hand, not a person, just the traces of where hands had been. My skin went cold in a way that didn't match the air. I didn't push the door. I did not push the door. I did nothing. The door decided. It latched. I stood on the landing with the closed door behind me, and my nameplate in my hand, and the coffee cup 2 floors down, and the papers under it saying, "Wait." I waited. For how long? Long enough for the lights to cycle twice. Long enough for the elevator to stop and open and close somewhere far away without me. Long enough for me to feel my legs start to tremble and for that to turn into a rhythm that matched the building's hum. Long enough for the smell of lemon cleaner to fade and be replaced by something like cold paper. When I couldn't stand it anymore, I walked down 1 flight and sat on the landing opposite the papers. Up close, the watermark was obvious. On one of the pages, just visible under the edge of the cup, I could make out the first line. By signing below, you acknowledge receipt. You can fill in the rest. It's bureaucratic. It's always the same. I looked at the cup. There was a coffee ring dried on the concrete under it. I looked at the pencil mark in the corner of the top page. It said something else now. It said, "If you take it, it's yours." I looked at my nameplate. My thumb had warmed it. The letters had a tiny burr. I thought about the boxes downstairs, full of names and keys and forms, like a molting of an animal that doesn't know when it's done shedding. I put the nameplate on top of the stack, under the cup. The cup didn't move. The papers didn't rustle. The building didn't sigh in relief. The light didn't blink. But something in my chest loosening told me I had done the right thing, or at least a thing. I stood up. I climbed back to my floor. The door was harder to open than it should have been, like at a hotel where the keycard works, but the door is private about it. I stepped back into the office. No one looked at me. Jenna's blazer hung on the back of her chair like she was still in it. Kim's sweater was gone. Raj was in the kitchen, eating something out of a small Tupperware with a spoon that was too small for the job. He looked up. He gave me a look that was almost a nod. Then he looked back down. I went to my desk. The box was gone. The small exit clearance sheet was gone. My monitor was off. The chair had the right bite mark on the lever again. My nameplate holder was empty, but I didn't touch it. I packed my bag like a person leaving a meeting. I picked up the photo of the stairwell and slid it into my notebook. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. It lit immediately. It arrived quickly. It smelled like new metal. The guard downstairs didn't look up. I walked out into the rain. Dumb ending, right? You want the spectacular. You want the thing with teeth. I get it. I would too. But that's not how offices work. That's not how this one worked. It wasn't a monster. It was a process. I didn't go back the next day. I sent an email from my personal account to Jenna that said I needed to take some time. She replied in less than a minute. Of course. Let us know when you're back. No questions. No HRCC. Efficient. Humane. If you don't look too close. I kept the photo. Sometimes at night I take it out and tilt it under a lamp and watch the watermark patterns come up. They don't always show the same boxes. Sometimes I think I see a signature line. Sometimes I think I see my name. If it's a trick of light, it's a good one. If it's not, I don't want to know the mechanism. We live fine not knowing how the elevator especially doesn't fail. People have asked me why I didn't burn the photo or toss it in a bin behind a grocery store in a different zip code. I tell them I might still, but that would mean admitting it's a thing. Right now, it's just paper. It's just an old office print with pencil on it. It's in my desk, under tax forms I haven't filed because I keep putting it off. That's honest. Sometimes I think about Mateo. If I saw him today, would we nod like acquaintances in a lobby? Would he say, "You did the right thing," in that voice that ends words early? I don't know. I haven't seen him in the street. I haven't seen him online. I haven't seen him in the office for obvious reasons. Maybe he got a better job. Maybe everyone does in the end. It's comforting to think so. Last piece. I swear. The other night I woke up and went to the bathroom and didn't turn on the light. I stood there in the doorway, and in the half-dark I expected the motion sensor to trigger and welcome me. It didn't. Because this is my apartment and I don't have a motion sensor. I went in, turned on the light like a normal person, and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked like a face. My eyes looked tired. I laughed quietly because it felt like I'd been holding a breath for a month and finally got to let it out. As I turned off the light, I heard paper rustle in the other room. It could have been the window. It could have been the envelope with the photo settling back into its shape. It could have been nothing. I stood in the doorway like a person does when they think they've left the stove on, listening. The sound didn't come again. I went back to bed. I slept. I had a dream that I walked into the office and every nameplate was blank. In the dream, I took out a pencil and wrote my name on one. The pencil pressed through the plastic like it wasn't there. The letters came out backwards from the other side, like they were supposed to be read by the building. I woke up with graphite on my finger. So that's it. Just a machine that knows our names better than we do, and sometimes asks us to trade them. I can't tell you what kind of person you are. I can only tell you what I did, and that the elevator is slow, but it's honest, and that somewhere in a cage downstairs, there are boxes full of names, and one of them used to be mine, and one of them might be yours, and if you take it, it's yours. That's the rule. I didn't make it. I just worked there. I got the keys from a plastic lockbox that hung off the railing like a tired padlock. The realtor had emailed me the code. Click, hinge, key on a blue fob. The stairs up to the deck were gray with salt and grit, each step a little soft in the middle from feet and weather. It was off-season, late in the year, and all the places on the strip had the same look. Shut shades, bent flags, faded weekly rental signs that fluttered against their own screws. You know that wind you get by the water that's not exactly strong but never stops? That was there, pushing at my jacket and moving my hair across my face every second. The house was on pilings. You could walk right under it and see daylight through the slats of the deck overhead. It had that steady, small sway that I decided not to think about. The driveway was crushed shell. When I stepped out of the car, something cracked under my heel that was either a shell or a light bulb. It turned out to be a pale, empty sand dollar that had been riding the wind for who knows how long. Inside, it smelled like old coffee and damp towels. Not rotten, just lived in and shut for a while. Wood paneling, a couch with cushions that fought you, a low table with ring stains, a TV that sat on a wicker stand. A sliding glass door looked out over the dunes and the line where the ocean started. Even from up on the deck you could smell it. Salt, sure, but also that rank, good mud smell that comes up when waves go out and drag air with them. There were little instructions taped everywhere, written by someone with neat, cramped handwriting. Please shake sand off feet before entering. Please do not use fireplace. Please set thermostat to 60 when leaving. There was a note about the sliding door. Please latch when not in use. Wind will try to walk it. I slid it and felt grit in the track under the door. It stuck halfway, then thumped shut. I picked the small bedroom. 2 single beds made up with thin quilts that had tiny sailboats stitched into them. I didn't come to the beach to spread out. I came because I had a week off and a head that felt like it had been plugged into a faulty outlet since June. I wanted quiet. I wanted to cook simple food on a bad stove and stare at a horizon that didn't need anything from me. I put my bag down and heard the first sound that I told myself was nothing. A soft dragging against wood. It came from the deck. I opened the sliding door and stepped out. The wind had caught the corner of a damp towel someone had left tacked over the outdoor shower and made it skim across the boards. Drag, drag, pause. I felt better after seeing that. I untacked the towel, wrung it out, hung it properly, and for the first time noticed the rope. It lay in a loose coil by the deck stairs. Not new rope. Thick, with hairy fibers sticking out, tan darkened to gray by water and sun. It looked like it had been cut off something larger with a bad knife. One end showed caked sand, as if it had been buried shallow and then pulled free. I nudged it with my shoe, and it left a dark wet mark on the board. I thought, someone's kid used it to drag driftwood, or it washed up and they planned to throw it out and forgot. I moved it away from the top of the stairs so I wouldn't trip over it and went inside. The first night was just noise, the kind you have to learn to fold into the background. The refrigerator's tiny rattle, the stove hood clicking, the pilings under the house groaning when a gust leaned against the siding. A gull landed on the deck once and knocked a shell against the railing. If you've ever slept in a house that sits on legs, You'll know the way you can feel waves with your body. Not big pushes. Just those small repeating shifts, as if the house took a breath and let it out and took another. In the morning I walked the beach. You know how you get down a set of wooden steps, and there's always a small drop at the end where the sand has been carried away. This one was about half a foot. My feet sank and filled with cold water, and then the next step was easy. The beach was empty. A few crabs had left their clean circles around holes. Bits of net caught in dune grass. Every now and then a piece of green bottle glass tumbled at my toes. I looked back at the house and saw it the way strangers see a rental. Square. A little sad. Not ugly. The deck wrapped around the beachside. The sliding glass door a dark rectangle. Under the house, through the lattice that screened the pilings, I could see daylight where the far side opened to the road. The tide line had bits of rope knotted with seaweed. I found a longer strand that had a blue thread running through it, the industrial kind, and hauled on it by habit, like maybe I'd get something useful. The rope ran down into the hard sand and didn't budge, so I cut it with my pocket knife and pulled up a length for no particular reason. It had a smell I didn't know rope could have. Not just salt, but old fish, and something faintly sweet, like water that sat in a bucket too long. I carried it back, thinking it might be good for tying the trash can lid when the wind hit. When I got to the steps, I saw that the coil I had moved the day before wasn't where I left it. I don't mean it had moved a little from the breeze. I mean it wasn't there. I looked up and down the deck and at the railing and told myself someone from the rental company had come by and tidied. But then I saw the mark it had left on the board. Dark, wet, the exact size of the coil, like a halo. And there were narrower marks where the rope had lain as it unwound. I stood there with the new rope in my hand and felt that tiny slide my brain does when something is off by a degree. I set my rope by the trash can and went inside to make coffee. Because coffee is the thing you do when your brain slides. The coffee machine had a brown ring inside the water reservoir, a map of where someone had poured and spilled 100 times. The first cup tasted like old paper, but in a comforting way. I drank it standing at the sliding door looking at the water. The door glass reflected the kitchen faintly. I saw my shoulder, the coffee mug, the hallway behind. The house felt warmer suddenly from sun on the glass. That's when the first nail-on-metal sound came from under the floor. Not loud. Just that scrape that makes your back muscles pull tight on their own. I set my mug down and walked to the top of the interior stairs that led to the ground level. The light down there had that sea-washed look already, even though it was morning. I could smell damp and sand and something else. I told myself it was the trash can with last week's fish in it. Under the house, the air had bite. Sand gathered in small drifts against the concrete posts. There were those little mesh vents cut into the block foundation to let air through. I heard another scrape and turned my head like I would toward a voice. All that was there was the lattice screen on one side and the dark line between sand and beam on the other, where light didn't go. The rope wasn't there. I didn't spend long. Some places tell you in 10 seconds you aren't welcome, and it's smarter to listen than to get brave over nothing. I cooked eggs. They stuck in the pan in a way that would have infuriated me at home but made me laugh here. I ate them with broken toast and butter that tasted faintly of the fridge. I wondered if I should call you then. I didn't. We'd made a whole plan for this trip. Go quiet for a few days. Don't feed the habit of narrating every small thing. You'd check in. I'd reply when I felt like it. We'd be friends without the constant drip. I still think it was a good plan. The day stayed clear. I read a book I didn't like and enjoyed not liking it. Afternoon, the wind came up hard enough to make the deck flag, an old yellow thing with some rental agency's logo, slap itself around. I thought about moving the grill into the corner. I didn't. That night the house gave a long, deep flex like a big cat turning over, and it felt almost friendly. Sometime after that I woke up, not to a particular sound, just the sense my body has when I'm not alone. I lay there with the thin quilt pulled up to my chest and felt that old thing I've had since I was a kid. If I don't move, I'll hear it better. I heard the refrigerator stop and start. I heard wind skip across the glass. I heard a soft patter like rain, but there was no rain. It was steady, then stopped, then steady again, like someone rinsing sand off their feet in the outdoor shower and tapping them dry on wood. I told myself it was a loose leaf of the towel slapping. I told myself many things. The thing that got me out of bed was the smell. A clean, sharp salt that came in under the door like a hand at the bottom of it. I got up and pressed the carpet with my palm like that would tell me something. It was dry. In the kitchen there was a streak on the floor. If I had kids, I would have said it was a small wet foot dragged across the tile. The streak went from the sliding door to the sink. It ended with a dark puddle under the cabinet kickboard. I looked up at the door. There were marks on the glass about waist high, wide smeared ovals. You would say handprints, but they didn't have finger detail. They were more like someone pressed wrapped hands against the glass and slid down. My first thought, this is stupid but it's true, was that a seal had flopped up onto the deck and nosed around, which is impossible here. My second thought was that a person came up from the beach and tried the door. That thought came with a hard, simple fear I could use. I turned the latch down and pushed the broom handle into the track the way my grandparents used to do. I cleaned the floor with the paper towels under the sink and one of those blue spray bottles that live forever. The water in the streak had fine sand in it that glittered when I moved the light. The paper towel tore when it grabbed the grit. I wiped the door until the smears were faint. I told myself I couldn't call anyone because I had no details, and because I didn't trust what I was seeing. I went back to bed and lay down and told the ceiling. Tomorrow, I buy a cheap camera and point it at the door. I must have fallen asleep because I dreamed of ropes, not sea horror rope. Just the ordinary rope you use to tie a Christmas tree to a car roof, except it never ended. I kept pulling and never found the end, and woke up with my hand still closing and opening like I was hauling. The next day clouded. The horizon line blurred into the water, a two-tone sea, steel and a lighter, dead fish belly color. I took my book outside and sat on the deck with it in my lap like a shield. I must have been out there for an hour when I noticed the footprints. They were not mine. They were far too big for that. Longer than my foot by 2 inches. They ran along the hard sand below the high tide line, moving toward the house from the empty side of the beach, and ended near the steps. They didn't begin anywhere I could see. There was no pair leading into them, no person in either direction. The wind erased details quick. but I stood there and watched the place where they stopped as if more would appear. They didn't. I waited. I made a joke to myself in my head. Maybe the guy had been walking backward, but it didn't sound like me. When I went down later to check again, the ocean had smeared the prints to nothing. The tide was rolling in with a low sound like breath held and released. I stood there and realized I was holding my own breath, and that made me embarrassed for myself. That evening the wind had a tone in it, not a whistle. More like a low call where you can't tell if it's one sound or a layered one. The phone showed 1 bar, then none. I sent you a quick all good and got the spinning bubble, then the exclamation mark. I told myself I liked it that way. I cooked pasta and ate it with the cheap sauce the last renter had left in the cupboard. It tasted like salt and sugar and memory. I washed the bowl and set it in the rack. The rope smell was back, faint. If you've ever left a towel in a bag for a day after swimming and then pulled it out and it's not quite moldy but it's on its way, that smell. I checked the leftovers I'd thrown out. Nothing. I opened the door to the stairs that went under the house and leaned in, and there it was stronger, with a sweet note like bruised fruit. I opened the door all the way and went down 2 steps. There were marks on the sand that looked like something heavy had been dragged in a lazy curve, then dragged back. From the deck side, under the slats, a length of the thick rope had been fed through one of the foundation vents and tied off to a piling with an ugly knot. The knot was fresh. The fibers where it twisted were still damp. The rope ran through the vent and out to where I couldn't see. I didn't do anything for a while. I just stood there with the soft house sway going through my legs and the smell in my throat. After a minute, I took my pocket knife, went down the final step, and put my weight on my heels in the sand, the way you do when you don't want to sink. I reached for the rope. There's a thing that happens when your hand meets something cold that is supposed to be warm, or warm that is supposed to be cold. Your skin tells you the story before your brain can form words. The rope felt like something alive that had recently died, cold like water, but with a give to it that wasn't right. I pulled my hand back like it bit me. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand flexing. Then I put the knife blade against the rope and saw how dull it was. How I would be sawing and fraying and not cutting through. I put the knife away. I backed up the stairs without turning my back on it. I should have called someone. The agency, the police, you. I didn't. Sometimes when you're halfway into something you don't understand, the last thing you want is to hand it to another person in a cheap box labeled, "Please fix." I shut the door and turned the latch and put a chair under the knob. Dumb, I know. Latches on interior doors are jokes. I made tea and didn't drink it. I put on a sweater and took it off. I stood at the sliding door and looked out. The water was lines on lines on lines, and I couldn't see where they broke. The door held my reflection softly. A person standing at a door, a kitchen behind them, a hall. I tried to make the scene harmless by naming every item like a game. Toaster, knife block, trash can, chair, rug, person, door, person, door. I stopped. In the glass, over my shoulder, near the sink, there was another shape, not crisp. I turned. Nothing. I breathed out with my mouth open because my nose had filled with the sweet rope smell again. I grabbed the bedspread from the spare room and pushed the sliding door open enough to hang it on a nail I put above the frame. It covered the glass like a patch on a wound. The breeze caught it at the bottom and made it billow. And that was worse. So I tacked the corners with pushpins I found in a drawer. After I did that, the house felt too quiet. I went into the small bedroom and propped the door with a shoe. I lay down and told myself not to listen, and then listened anyway. The wind shifted to a direction the house didn't like. The deck boards knocked softly against their screws. The fridge clicked again. Somewhere, something metal rolled a short distance and stopped. My sleep came in thin strips. Each time I surfaced, the bedspread over the door was a picture in my head. How it hung, whether it moved, whether there were hands under it pressing. I woke once with my calf stinging like I'd scraped it on something. In the morning there was a red band wrapped around the skin. Not a perfect ring, more like a burn in a line crossing itself. I tried to make a joke in the bathroom mirror. Nice tattoo, man, but it came out with no air behind it. Clouds stacked over the water and stayed. The radio on the counter, the sort of grocery store thing with a big dial, gave me a weather report in a voice that sounded more bored than worried. Strong surf, higher than usual tides. Watch the dunes and stay off the rocks. I said, okay, to an empty room. Then I did what I am good at, which is chores I can't finish. I took out the trash, swept sand out of corners, wiped down the counters, folded the spare linens, washed mugs that were already clean. The burn on my calf nagged when I bent my knee. When I went under the sink for cleaner, something dripped on my hand from the cabinet. I wiped it on my shorts. It dried sticky and smelled like the rope again. By late afternoon, the sky had that look where it was all one color, and the water was the same color, and the house felt like a cube hung in cotton. The wind came up steady. A gull flew backward over the beach, flapping hard and not going anywhere. The flag on the deck clapped itself into a tight tube and yanked at the pole. The outdoor shower head started to cough, then stream, not full pressure, but enough to spray onto the boards. I turned the handle off. It kept going for a while anyway, because that's how it is when the line shakes. It finally slowed to a steady drip that was somehow worse than the spray. When I opened the stair door again, the rope had tightened until it sang. It went out the vent in a straight line, no slack. The knot had pressed deep into itself. The sand under it showed a wet trench made by strain. You know how line looks when it's pulling something you can't see? That slight vibration that isn't wind. If I'd had any sense, I would have left right then and walked fast to the neighbor's place and banged on their door. But the idea of opening a door, any door, felt like stepping off a dock into water I couldn't see through. The first strong shove hit the house just after dark. Not a gust, a push. The pilings took it and moved the force up through the floor into the table legs and my knees. A low boom followed from under the deck, like a truck hit a guardrail in slow motion. Then another shove. Then a sound like rope sliding over wood. The bedspread over the door lifted as if someone outside had grabbed it and shook it once. The pushpins held with a squeal. I did call then. The agency number went to a voicemail that assured me everything I needed to know was in the welcome packet. There was no welcome packet. I called the non-emergency number listed on the brochure by the fridge. It rang long, picked up, crackled, went to silence. I stood there with the phone to my ear and listened to nothing, and realized I was doing it to not listen to the house. Something knocked in the kitchen drawer, the one with utensils, like a fork slid and hit the front. I went in and opened it and stared at the stainless steel as if it would ask me a question. Another knock under my feet. Drag. The smell thickened until I could taste it. It wasn't rot exactly. It carried a fresh note, like seawater thrown against a hot pan. I put my hand on the back of a chair because my balance had started to go with the sway. A ragged shape pushed into the bedspread from the outside where it covered the glass. Not a handprint. More like the pressure of something that didn't have a simple outline. It rose in the middle and slumped, rose, slumped. It left a darker patch that spread, then trickled down. The trickle cut a path through the salt that dries on glass in lace patterns. I stood there with the broom handle in the track and my weight on my toes and thought, the deck is wet. The house is swaying. The rope is tight. The only door I can get out of easily is the one with that on the other side of it. I went for the front door. It had swollen. Water had gotten into the wood, or maybe the frame was off by an inch from the shift. The knob turned and turned, and the door did not give. I threw my shoulder into it twice and felt the hollow core take the impact and bounce it back at me. I ran to the small bedroom and yanked at the window. The screen came away in my hands, but the window had that cheap latch you have to slide and lift in exactly the right way, and my fingers wouldn't obey me. The house gave another long flex, and the wall against my shoulder felt warm, as if the air on the other side wasn't air. Back in the kitchen, the bedspread had dark spots sunk into it. Not everywhere, just here and there, like someone had pressed a wet shirt against it. The breeze pushed at the bottom again, and a thin stream of water slipped under onto the floor in a neat line. My first thought was a practical one. Towels. I grabbed every towel I could find and jammed them at the base. The towels sucked up water and turned heavy. That made me feel smart for about 10 seconds. There was another sound under the house. Not a drag this time. Something like a person pulling up onto a ledge. The sound of mass on wood. Then the impression of weight moving from one spot to another, shaking grit down from the boards in a soft hiss around me. The utensils drawer slid open on its own a few inches and then shut. The flag outside must have ripped because there was a snap, and then nothing. You'll want me to say I heard words. I didn't. I heard a shape of sound that my head wanted to make into words. Like when you're in a crowd and you catch one syllable that could belong to a dozen things. There was one phrase that kept arriving though. Not in the air exactly, but inside my chest. The way you can feel your name being said in another room. Help me. That's what heads do under pressure. They run captions. Help me. Help me. It wasn't a plea in the way you want it to be. It had no personality. It was more like a label attached to a piece of footage. The rope burned through the knot. I'm not making that up. I saw a blackened smear at one twist, and a slow smoke rose from it, thin as hair. It might have been friction. It might have been my head. The rope jerked and jerked again, and with each jerk the bedspread punched inward and then sagged. I pulled the broom handle and the latch and yanked the door a hand's breadth. Salt water ran over my foot, numb cold. The deck was there, not 10 inches away, slick as a gut. The rope lay across it at an angle, drawn taut over the rail. It groaned against the wood like teeth on a plate. I stuck the kitchen knife under it and sawed. If you've ever cut wet rope, you know it fights. The blade skates, The fibers stretch and snap back into the cut. Each sawing motion sent little curlicues into the air that stuck to my arm. The rope pressed down on the knife as if it knew. It smelled like a dock after a long day and also like hair. That's the part I don't like to say, because it sounds like the kind of lie you'd add to gain a reaction. But the smell was there. Hair and salt and the inside of a waterlogged mattress. I kept sawing. The house moved under my feet. The knife bit and then caught, and I pushed and it went through. The tension released so fast, I fell sideways. The rope snapped back through the vent under the deck, speeding, leaving a burned black mark on the concrete and a whip crack in the air. Something under the deck hit the pilings and then the sand. It wasn't a splash. It wasn't any sound I can name. It carried weight, then nothing. The wind took a breath and held it. Then it blew again, harder. I slammed the door shut and sank down with my back to it, shoulder blades on cold glass under the wet cloth. The towels at the bottom squelched. I felt, clear as a touch, something slide slow across the outside of the glass where my shoulder was. Not fingers. More like a coil being dragged, or a mass shifting its hold. For a second I thought the glass would give. It didn't. The power went out. The house became a different place immediately. The fridge stopped humming, which should have made it quieter, but all the other sounds got louder. The wind, the water, the tiny ticks of sand. I sat in the dark and told myself to breathe, and when I did, I realized I was breathing in salt air through the tiny spaces around the door, and that my lips tasted like the ocean. I got up. I made my body move. I went to the small bedroom and gathered what I could carry. Phone, wallet, keys. The window latch gave when I slowed down and did the small move it requested. I shoved the screen out and it clattered onto the deck roof below. I put one leg through. The wind grabbed my shirt like a hand. I pulled my other leg through and sat there with my feet on the roof and my body inside. I could not make my hands let go of the window frame. A beam of light hit the house. A car on the road behind, cutting through slats somewhere, finding me for a second. Then a horn, short and close. A voice I recognized yelled my name. You know who it was. I told you later. It was the neighbor I'd never met, the older man with the red truck. He'd come to check lines and shutters, and he'd seen the dark shape of the flagpole whipping and thought something was wrong. He shouted, "Front side," and I shouted, "Swollen." And he said he had a bar and to hold on. I crawled back through the window like a man being pulled through a hole. I ran to the front door. It stuck, then gave with a crack that felt like breaking my own arm. Cold air hit my teeth. The neighbor's flashlight hammered in, and the first thing it landed on was the kitchen. The bedspread hung soggy and salt sparkling. The rope burn on the concrete block under the stair door smoked in the beam like an old fuse. The neighbor's mouth did a thing that was not a word. We didn't talk much. We did the things you do when a house asks you to leave. He had me take nothing heavy. He said, "Now," in a way that let me be a child for a minute and follow. Outside, the deck floor was slick. The outdoor shower dripped steadily. The cut end of the rope lay on the boards like a dead eel. We went down the steps on our asses, step by step, laughing a little in an embarrassed way because that's how people are. And then we were on the road, and his truck was a real object with edges, and the cabin smelled like old coffee and a dog, and I wept once. One single animal sound that surprised me. and then I was quiet. He took me to his place a few houses down, a brick thing set back from the dunes, solid and close to the ground. His wife made a noise that was both a welcome and a question, and put a towel around my shoulders by habit, like I was a kid who'd gotten out of a pool too fast. I sat on a bench and watched my hands shake and thought, that's interesting. They asked me if I wanted a drink, and I shook my head, and then nodded, and then shook my head again. The neighbor said, "You cut it," and it wasn't a question. I said, "Yes," and it sounded like someone else's voice. We heard something out there in the dark for a while. You could call it thunder. It didn't come from the sky. The neighbor turned the radio up and talked over it. The wind made the eaves sing. The house creaked, but in the way of a thing that wouldn't shift its mind. In the morning, after the worst had passed, we drove back. The beach steps had disappeared. The last 3 were hanging like teeth in a jaw. The deck had lost a board that went out over the sand like a tongue. The bedspread over the glass had dried in a stiff, salt white crust, and then torn away and lay in the corner. The stair door to the underhouse was open a crack, even though I remember latching it and chairing it. The rope was gone. We didn't go under. I didn't need that. I wasn't looking for proof. I bent down and touched the blackened streak on the block where the rope had burned, and when my finger came away, it had a faint gritty film on it like ground shell. We stood there quietly. The neighbor finally said, "Storm takes what it wants," and I let him have that sentence because I couldn't handle him saying anything more accurate. Later, after I'd moved back to my apartment and you'd come over and put groceries in my fridge like a parent, I got an email from the rental agency. It was a form letter about repairs and weather events. The attached assessment had a photo of the underside of the deck with a red circle drawn around a piling where someone, not me, had chopped at a knot and left a mess of rope there. The caption said something about removing marine debris to prevent pest harborage. The word harborage made me sit down. I had a feeling then, as clear and dumb as a label on a jar, that there had been something under the house that was being held in place, and I had cut it, and it had gone back to wherever held in place was keeping it from. Not freed exactly. Returned. The way a tide returns, not because it wants to, but because it must. A week after that, I got a different email. This one was from some town office with a seal in the header. It said the property would be inspected for structural issues, and that a section of chain and associated material had been recovered from under the structure following erosion, and that law enforcement had been notified as a matter of course. There were words like entanglement and organic. I don't know what they found. I didn't call to ask. Some details will stick to you for a long time if you let them, and I don't have room for new ones. Do I think it was a ghost? No. I don't like that word because people hear it, and 100 stories pop up in their heads, and none of those are mine. I think the ocean holds on to things until it doesn't, and when it lets go, sometimes it chooses you to carry it a foot farther. I think a rope is never just a rope if it's been in salt water a long time. It becomes a list of everything it touched. Pieces of boats, hands, hair, iron. I think houses that sit on legs learn some of the ocean's habits, and if you sleep in them, you feel those habits as if they belong to your own body. I think I cut a rope because it needed cutting for me to live, and cutting it made something else happen that I don't want to think about too much. that's as far as I'll go. A few things have stayed with me. Nothing dramatic. No voices at night. No wet footprints in my hallway. Sometimes I wake up because my mouth tastes like salt. Not sea salt from a shaker. The other kind. Sometimes water runs in a line across my kitchen floor from nowhere to nowhere and dries to a thin crust that leaves lace when you wipe it. Once, on a day with no weather at all, the towel I keep in my gym bag smelled like it had been crammed wet into a trunk for a month, and when I threw it into the wash, the machine made a sound like line running off a spool. I don't tell people to avoid beach houses. You know I'm not a warning type. But if you go, when you go, because you love that kind of quiet, do me 2 favors. First, don't sleep with the big glass showing the water if you can help it. Hang something over it, even if it feels silly. Not because of reflections or hands, because the ocean likes to look back. And if you give it a chance, it will. Second, if you find a coil of rope on the deck and it's not exactly where you left it, don't decide immediately that you moved it and forgot. Let yourself believe your own eyes for a minute. You don't have to call anyone or write a report. Just listen for a little longer than comfort allows. I'll go back someday, maybe. Not to that house. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere that sits low and heavy on its foundation and leans against the ground like it trusts it. I'll walk down to the water and put my hand in and tell it hi, like you would a neighbor you can't avoid and shouldn't try to. I'll look for bits of rope and I won't pick any up. I'll stand there until I can feel my own breath return to a rhythm that isn't the ocean's. Then I'll go home. I'll call you. We'll talk about anything else for a while. We'll pretend not to hear the small, steady scrape coming from the edge of the conversation. There's one last piece I keep not telling you because it sounds small, and I don't want it to drag the whole story into some shape you'll recognize and dismiss. The morning before the neighbor banged and the door gave, I did something stupid that I forgot to mention. I took the little blue notebook from the drawer by the stove, the one people use to write "Great View" and "Bring bug spray," and I flipped through it to find a diner someone had recommended. There were the usual notes. Best sunrise at the Point. Watch for jellyfish. Then an entry in a neater hand than the rest that said, "Do not look in the glass at night. It shows what is behind you and what is under you, and they are not always the same." I laughed when I read it. I put the book back and felt clever for not being the kind of person who scares themselves with other people's words. Now, when I think about the bedspread hung on the door, and the way my reflection had another shape in it, and the line of the rope vibrating through the vent, and the knot language that said "help me" in no one's voice, I want to go back to that moment at the counter and pick up the notebook and tear that page out and swallow it so it can't get in my head again. But that's not how any of it works. The page is still there, probably. Someone else will read it. Maybe they'll laugh. Maybe they'll cover the door just in case. I'm still not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to remember the burn on my leg that you saw, and the way the towels I brought back to the city smelled even after 2 runs through your machine, and the photo I showed you of the rope mark on the concrete, and how I couldn't stand in your kitchen that first week without standing on your rug like the tile was cold water. If you can carry those like I do, then I don't have to carry them alone. That's what this is about. You know what I miss? The low, boring sound of waves when they aren't doing anything special. The noise that sits under everything, the way a refrigerator hum sits under a day. The part that tells you the world is going about its business without you. I think that's why I went. I wanted the world to keep going without me loudly for a while. It did. It pulled at its rope. It tested its knots. It made a show of it. And I made the wrong cut at the right time. And I'm still here because of that wrong cut. If there is a lesson, that's the closest I can come. You don't always get to know if what you did was a rescue or a release. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's neither. And you only think it is. Because you need your actions to matter in a storm. I keep the pocket knife in a drawer now with the blade folded and a dull edge on it. When I open the drawer to get something else, I smell steel. And faintly, salt. I could sharpen it. I don't. I leave it as it is to remind myself that tools don't make you ready. You can stand in your own kitchen with your hand on the counter and be as safe as you'll ever be. And a rope can still hum through the wall and the floor and the sink in your body. And if someone ever tells you that a door doesn't keep anything out but the polite, you can tell them I agree. Still, I like doors. I like latches. I like the way a broom handle sits in a track and says, "Not today. If you go, text me when you get there." If you forget and only remember after you've stood at the glass for a long minute and seen yourself in a shape that might be a coat hanging on a chair, that's okay. Tell me about the wind. Tell me about the towels, whether they smell like anything at all. Tell me about the rope you didn't find and how you didn't touch it. I'll tell you I'm fine. I'll mean it. I'll close my own door a little tighter and step back, just one, and listen for the tide knocking its old notes on whatever it still has down there in the dark.